for the seventh installment, and I'm covering up the lens here as I replace the earbud. All right, so the seventh installment in our series upon Gunther Anders' work, The World as Phantom and as Matrix. Last time we went through chapter 6. In chapter 6, what we're working with is sort of distracted because of this screen orientation. I was using the vertical. I've trying this landscape view, and now I don't know quite where to look. So if my eyes are directed a bit oddly, that's why. Curiosities of this sort of quasi guerrilla take, I'm assuming, with respect to this process. In any event, to get back to the meat of the issue. Last time we reviewed how the world, having been sort of transformed as a consequence of our reception of it through avenues of broadcast media, whether by television or by radio or the internet or what have you, assumes on the one hand the aspect of a sort of phantom, and that it is never either fully present or absent. And within the sort of space of that happening, events themselves can be sort of detached from the concrete points of their emergence in space and time. And by implication, subjected to a logic of commodity. And then in turn, the world itself is transformed into a sort of matrix from which these events, as sort of instances of replication that emerge to serve again that sort of commodity logic. Various other consequences, effects cascade out of this sort of this set of processes. And the one which was the focus of our last video was how experience is rendered superfluous. Concrete engagement, encounter with the world is sort of seen as vestigial, as that now one can sort of sit on the receiving side of whatever device it is through which they see the world, and then they can take it. They can take it, they can receive it, they can consume it. Of course, they don't actually take or receive or consume it concretely like they would if they actually went out into the world, the wide world as it were, after the fashion of, to cite a contemporary myth, after the fashion of Frodo or Bilbo Baggins, right? No, they can abide in the comfort of their living room, proverbially, and assume the aspect of a kind of god. Of course, this is illusory given the phantom nature of the world and the passivity which is induced by dint of this circumstance. And along the other consequence of this sort of candification, if you like, of experience is that the actual alienated condition in which we find ourselves in this world, along multiple vectors, is concealed. And one of the mechanisms, if you like, through which this concealment transpires is the focus of Section 7, upon which I, want to focus today. Section 7 refers to a process of banalization. It's a translation of a German word which might more literally mean something to the effect of to make more familiar, more ordinary, more commonplace. But the word banalization, or to render the world banal, I enjoy in virtue of the more pejorative connotation that it justly attaches to this sort of disestrangement. Now, on one hand, you might say, well, hold on a second. Is that such a bad thing? Do we not wish to remedy the alienation of which you were just misspeaking? And the answer there is that, well, insofar as the remedy of alienation is salutary, it has to be authentic. This is not an authentic reclamation of a full relationship with the world, because the mode of familiarity itself is a dissimulation. It's a dissembling, and dissembling is a better word there. And you can see it. I mean, it's amazing that he wrote this work in the very late 50s, early 60s, right? Because so much of it is just on the nose. You can see it in, so-called, for instance, reality television, where people who are behaving in the most extraordinarily, really perfidious and petty and adolescent ways are put before us as examples of what ordinary people are. And we are, by implication, where we're supposed to associate and identify with these people and understand them as a kind of exemplar of ordinary human being, which, whereas they are a kind of, they are participating in a kind of human being, it is actually one worth very little, actually beneath the tier of even the most entry-level kind of dignity, right? But it just becomes a matter of course that we then see those sorts of ridiculous modes of soap opera theatrically presented as reality, when in fact they're utterly staged. We see these presentations as somehow paradigmatic. Or you see other things as suddenly seeming completely ordinary, which shouldn't be ordinary, extraordinary things. And there's an ambiguity to it. You can watch a nature documentary, get some sense of Yosemite at a great distance. And I'm not going to say that's altogether a bad thing, but at the same time, are you ever really going to understand what it is to encounter Yosemite without actually going there? By analogy, speaking personally, I had seen multiple pictures, films, etc. of Niagara Falls, and thought, oh well, what's that? It's just a waterfall. How impressive could that be? But a sort of circumstance arose where I actually went to Niagara Falls, providentially, because it wasn't something I was going out of my way to do. And the encounter was virtually numinous. To actually witness firsthand the extraordinary power of that water surging over and down, and it was actually quite amazing. But you're never going to actually be able to touch that reality through a screen. Even if the screen is then amplified or enhanced to present a sort of all-around virtual experience, it's still going to be hollow relative to the actual world. Nonetheless, the thing about the actual world is that there's peril, there's risk, there's vulnerability, and the great temptation of encounter through broadcast, encounter at a distance, is that it insulates us from that risk and puts us back into a place of perceived safety. Of course, it's not actually safe. It's actually quite dangerous, more dangerous than actually going out into the world on all kinds of levels. Not just sort of spiritual, emotional, psychological levels, even in a sense physical levels, because of the atrophy which is visited upon your being by existing in such a sedentary way, and so on and so forth, right? But then again, the sort of irony is that as you continue to be exposed to these sorts of presentations of the world as a series of images that you can just get from your Amazon Prime or your Netflix or what have you, as you continue, if you allow yourself to continue to be exposed you suddenly become sort of infected by an almost ineradicable ennui or boredom. You're like, well, why bother? Why bother to go to the Grand Canyon? Why bother to go to Boston? Why bother to go to Paris? Why bother to see the ocean? Why bother? All right, because it's right there, safe and so forth, right? And it's actually, there's an inertia that sets in that it's very difficult to overcome. So this banalization, which makes extraordinary things seemingly ordinary, and this setting forth of certain figures of human interaction, which are quite repellent, frankly, as standard. It's all, I think, sort of transparently bad. And I'll wrap it up with sort of a footnote. I think the translator, in choosing the word banalization, is actually, and I don't know this, I'm speculating, tipping their hat to the fact that Gunther Anders was Hannah Arendt's first husband. And what's notable about that is the thesis which Hannah Arendt presents about the nature of evil. Right? Evil is not something extraordinary. It's in fact incredibly banal. And that was the word which Hannah Arendt invoked in analyzing her experience of Nazis during the Nuremberg trials and so forth, right? Now, what really was notable about the whole monstrosity which occurred under the Nazi regime and the Nazis themselves was their incredibly pedestrian, thoughtless character. Now, when I say thoughtless, it doesn't mean that they were stupid, right? There was a capacity for a certain level of intellection, but it was utterly mechanical and at a distance from lived life. This, for Arendt, was really the essence of evil. So we have to look at what's happening in a world in which we are allowing ourselves to be continuously dominated by image and relay as the form of encounter, as perhaps just sort of drawing us into a morally dangerous, hazardous situation. It's deadening us, it's numbing us to our ethical, our moral, and our existential sensibilities in a way that needs to be resisted and I would hope ultimately overcome. And that's sort of what we find in section 7 of chapter 1 of the world as phantom and as matrix. And hopefully you'll find that sort of stimulating, worthy of thought in any event. I thank you for your time and attention. I will catch you guys next time.